ahead and get started with a couple of administrative things. We'll just do attendance and then the meeting minutes. Looks like we've got a quorum. So, Member Montgomery? Here. Member Paula?
Here.
Member Smith?
Here.
Member Dean?
Here.
Member Miller?
Here.
Member Evans? Here. Member Ortiz? Here. And Ms. Soria is absent. Okay, with a quorum, I will hear a motion. Has everyone reviewed the previous meeting minutes? Should we look at those?
I
have reviewed them. Okay, has anyone not reviewed them?
I have not, but I'll get them anyway.
Okay.
Nope, we're good. We're good.
Are you sure?
Yes, totally.
We're not in a hurry.
No, it's
I
all
support you. And your
good. And I support
I
all.
make a space for you.
That's all. I'm
Stress.
good.
Oh, yeah, we didn't
Don't
vote.
rush, we'll look
There's
away.
nothing
We're gonna
about
say them
you.
anyway. It was. We don't even. That'll think I'm okay.
We didn't
I'm
give you
okay.
any additional.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. As long as no other duties assigned to the single non-voting member.
Okay. I'll hear a motion to approve. the meeting
Motion to
minutes
approve the previous meeting minutes
I'll second that.
for September.
Excellent,
I'll second that.
wonderful. All in favor of approving the previous meeting minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. All right. So we will kick off our first investigation review. Everyone has the discussion plan and has reviewed the evidence. So we'll go ahead and look, if you look at the top of the second page, we'll just talk quickly about our protocol overview. The extent of our review authority, we're going to vote whether or not we agree or disagree with the findings of ACPD and the IPA's reports, which were very thorough and helpful in contextualizing all the evidence and the associated policies. It doesn't seem like we have folks for public comment, so we will put a placeholder for future investigations that we're willing to hear public comment at the end of our meetings after our proceedings. But let's just kind of talk through the summary that we have here of the police encounter. Gary and I were the co-leads on this one, and we had a complainant allege to the COB that he was illegally searched and physically detained by Officer A, citing an experience of PTSD, fearing for his life during an encounter with the police. The encounter took place outside a commercial storefront in South Arlington, and it followed a report to ACPD of animal abuse. The complainant, when the officers arrived on scene, had a brief encounter. From the body-worn camera footage, we can see what we need to see from the interaction to kind of review. There were interviews with the complainant, the officer involved, and so we're looking at the two policies of search and seizure and use of force. Before we start, does anyone have questions about the encounter, the summary, or the embedded policies? I'll preview that the IPA report included a kind of update that in the interview with the complainant, there was kind of a third implicit allegation. So I have it listed here that we'll talk about both search and seizure elements of unlawful detainment and confiscating and returning the phone, and then use of force. Do we have any questions or elements of the report that we want to talk through with either the IPA or our visiting ACPD members? any reflections that folks want to address in those things? I have some starting comments. I'm happy to kick us off, but I want to make space for everyone to ask questions or frame this out. Okay, so I think I felt like both the IPA and ACPD reports kind of fully address the information available to corroborate, you know, what took place during the incident. The body-worn camera footage captured, I think, what we needed to understand the events that took place. I think there were a couple of elements in the IPA's report, you know, recommendations that could be valuable to discuss since we have ACPD here about, you know, the element in the complainant's interview about how many police cars arrived on the scene. And I think it was useful that, you know, there's an acknowledgement that we can't put a maximum, but I was kind of curious about what kind of protocols may exist explicitly or implicitly for kind of identifying what the current scenario is and whether kind of additional officers on a scene, and this pertains, you know, to this incident and other kind of considerations, that other officers who may not be immediately necessary, is there some policy or guidance about kind of spacing themselves out or moving away from an incident?
So, go ahead. I was going to say, so, you know, this is just a sort of a background. All officers are assigned a specific area or district that they're supposed to work. And, you know, your assignment is where you should normally geographically be located throughout your day-to-day activities. And so every once in a while, we'll have like other units working, right? And it's, you know, they're supplemental to patrol. So they're not necessarily assigned a specific geographic area, but they can pretty much roam freely throughout the county. So this is sort of the foundation of like how our beat map system works and how and where people are assigned. These geographical areas are either very large, depending on call volume, like up in like, you know, North Arlington and in some of the residential areas, that geographical area is actually very big for that beat. Then you come down to Crystal City, where it's a little bit busier and that geographical area is much smaller. And so this is a way of me saying you are assigned a specific location. Now, depending on the nature of the call and how many parties are involved, that's going to dictate sort of what an officer would sort of deem as an appropriate response. So for most calls dealing with a singular individual, that is a two-person dispatch response, right? So if there's some sort of dispute taking place, whether it be verbal or, you know, physical, that is a minimum of 2 people to come to. If there is some other X factor involved in the call for service, and in this case there was, right? There was an animal or maybe perhaps 2 animals that were involved, that's going to escalate or elevate our necessity to have additional units, right? Because an officer cannot talk to an individual, you know, sort of watch them and then watch other animals in place. And so for this particular call, which I believe a total of 4 people ended up kind of passing through at some point, I believe that that is definitely proportional, well within reasonable for the nature of this type of call, right? We have 2 individuals and then we have 2 animals that are on scene that may or may not have had some kind of interaction with one another. So that's gonna be more than sort of your 2-person response, because you have that animal factor listed in there. And I hope that's an answer to your response, sort of providing the background and then sort of how this call came about. Yes?
Who makes the decision as to the number of officers on a scene?
For the number of officers who are dispatched, that's going to be the dispatcher who is going. However, if people are passing by, hear the call, things of that nature, they can make a decision on their own to show up for them.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Can I just ask one last thing? So on the animal thing, I mean, is it any animal? I mean, small, big, I mean.
Yeah, so it's funny because the officers,
call.
because the officers don't know the size of the animal. They just know that there's a dog or an animal that's involved in this complaint, and that kind of necessitates an additional person there, because It doesn't say, oh, very small dog, you know,
Yes.
a very small dog that really can't hurt you.
Okay.
It's like there's some animals that would possibly not. So,
Yeah, it's kind of a,
Yeah.
not assume the worst, but
but
you
you,
want to take care of the
yes,
citizens'
Yes.
safety. Okay.
One other question in terms of materials that we got for this, and I thought the report was great. I thought all the work that everybody did on it was thorough and really, but we got just a printout of the 911, like
the CAD call.
the cat, yeah,
yes.
but we didn't actually get the
Audio.
well, the audio or the report, the dispatch from the 911 to the police. Like, what did they tell the officers who went to the scene? And I don't think it would have changed anything, but I'd be just curious, like, what was in their head when they went to the scene?
So every officer has the ability to pull up that call and see everything that you saw in that CAD printout. So whether I'm assigned to the call or not, I can tap that call on my computer and I can look at the call history.
And that comes up like in like near real time?
Yes,
Wow.
real time. I tap the call, whether I'm in Crystal City or North Arlington, I can be like, oh, I just heard that animal complaint go out. Let me just see what the facts are about that. I'm curious, and I can tap it, and everything that you just saw, I can see on my computer. So, and then as far as the 911 call and what was dispatched, the 911 might be different, but what was dispatched and what you see in CAD are very, very similar. So what the dispatcher tries to do is basically read the call notes from the CAD call so they audibly can tell the police officer, hey, you don't actually have to look at your computer screen. I'm going to tell you what the call is. And this is beneficial if you're standing outside the car away from the computer and you hear the call for service. I don't have the benefit of seeing it on my computer, so I can listen to it on the radio, and that information is 99% the same. So
it's not the 911 caller who does the dispatching. They have to transfer the information to
Correct.
the dispatcher, and then they can actually, they pick the officer in the car, and
Yes.
and they say, okay, I got it. And then they radio, and the officer hears it, or he or she can look at it.
correct.
So in the dispatch center, you have two different positions that you're referring to. One is the call taker, the person that's accepting the call. They're not the one who's dispatching.
Okay.
So for what the dispatcher is dispatching the call from whatever information the call taker puts into the system. So both the police and the dispatcher, as the call taker is put that information in, real time gets the type information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there other elements of the policy or events that folks want to discuss? Lisa?
I was gonna bring up what we
Yeah.
talked about earlier. So I'm just curious about what the policy is around de-escalation, you know, when you perceive that a citizen involved in whatever's going on could be agitated. What sort of, I don't know if it's policy, training guidelines do officers, I'm particularly curious as to the decision to get that close to somebody who seemed upset. So I'm just wondering.
So there are policies. If you look at the use of force policy, it does speak to de-escalation, and then, you know, officers are required to de-escalate situations, and so it does talk about de-escalation. From a training perspective, that de-escalation training comes in many different formats, and that's seen and spattered throughout all types of training that we do, whether it be tactical training, firearms training, scenario-based training, and then very specific like CIT training. And I think most of you are familiar with the CIT program, where it teaches you how to deal with individuals, you know, who may be experiencing some sort of distress or something like that. So that training is pushed out to the officers after they've had a little bit of time being a police officer. And I think we found that to be beneficial. Instead of putting them in that very long, extensive, elaborate training, I believe it's like 40 to 80 hours of training before they become a police officer. We want them to experience being a police officer first for a year or two. Learn what it's like to be a police officer. Then let's cycle you through the CIT training. You've got a little bit of experience now. You've dealt with individuals maybe on a wide different spectrum of like who have been dealing with mental health crises, and then we send them to that CIT training, which we do in tandem with DHS. And so, specifically for like, scenario-based trainings, whether we're doing like use of force training or like I don't know, like active countermeasures or ground fighting, there's always a scenario-based component to that training, and there's always a de-escalation type scenario that's involved in that. And so I guess and this is a way to sort of address your question on its face, which is like, what would constitute, why would an officer feel it necessary to get so close to someone in a specific scenario? Some of that is just based on like what they perceived at the time, their perceived need to be closer to the person. And then, at the end of the day, like, well, I can't really say that with this case, but, it might be their perception on their necessity to be close to that person at the time. So it'd be difficult for me to put myself in that shoes without understanding the dynamics. And I think all of you have seen this video, which is a little bit chaotic at the beginning. And sometimes by coming closer to someone, there is a sense that you can exert a little bit more authority over them. And so I don't want to put words into someone's, or like put myself in the way that they were thinking, but that is a possibility in this case.
So when you wait the year or two before sending them to that training, do you allow them to be paired with someone who's already been through that training, or how does that work?
So they get paired up with a field training officer who should have had that training at some point. And so that 12-week cycle of training pairs them with someone who is an experienced police officer who helps them sort of shuttle them through the different types of calls for service over through whatever call that they're facing. And then remember, most officers, when those types of calls occur, do not deal with those calls by themselves. They're going to be dispatched with someone else who will likely have had that training. And so obviously we can't I can't predetermine that, or we can't predetermine that, but it's very likely that that individual who shows up on call may be a little bit more senior and has had that training.
On the training, if I can, we're aware from having gone to the training campus that they have this digital technology, and you can look at someone who may be in ways because of being on substance, stuff like that. But in situations where we're dealing with like PTSD, especially in this area, we have a lot of military overlay and stuff like that in this area. Can you speak to me about training that's available, that you may be looking into, that specifically targets, things that officers may be aware of in an area like ours that has a lot of, active former military folks who, or worked in other areas which, may, have their different trauma-related responses to when an officer shows up.
The crisis intervention training, the CIT
Yeah.
training that you referred to, that includes that as well.
Okay, so that is a
That is a
component of it.
component.
What? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So one of the reasons why I asked about what the dispatcher might have said to the officers was of interest to me, because there wasn't, and I don't think there could have been a reference to the officers that the ultimate complainant was, as indicated at the scene, someone who had an issue that they were aware of, but the officers didn't know that, it wasn't communicated to them, wasn't part of the report, which is probably common. I mean, I don't know how that would typically come up because it would be a rare thing that you would know what somebody else is dealing with. So the CIT stuff is only triggered when there's advance reference to the officers, like coming to the scene, be aware, and that's not the case in many situations, and it wasn't the case here. So I think my perspective is kudos to Officer B, who took control of the situation and correctly told Officer A to return the phone immediately. Looking at the body-worn camera video, I mean, it's hard to see exactly what triggered the initial action of Officer A to take the phone, other than it was a bit of a quick movement, but you could see from the video that the complainant was turned, and you could see the cell phone in his pocket. You know what I mean? So, but on the other hand, I mean, I see that the officers, like, it was fairly quick movement. That officer reacted or overreacted a little quickly, and boom, Officer B, I thought, just handled it beautifully. So, you know, I mean, I thought that the result was good. The other thing that I was interested in, though, there was reference to, you know, the initial call to the police referenced animal abuse. And there was an inquiry during your interview with the complainant about, well, do the dispatchers ever just say, call animal control? And I wanted to ask that, if there's any policy on that. The one other fact, and I thought, boy, maybe that would really be an easy fix, but I did notice on the complaint sheet that the dispatcher or the 911 person said they could overhear the complainant yelling in the background. So that sort of made it, in their mind, perhaps more than just a straight animal control issue.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. So, you know, an animal complaint, you're right, it would just be handled by animal control. But when you have two people arguing on scene, you know, that's active, that has to be handled by a police officer. Animal control is not equipped to handle something like that. So yes, you basically said exactly what I was going to say, is that the dynamics of the incident necessitated a police response.
I want to go back to what Lisa asked about de-escalation, because we had this discussion about this. And here again, both these reports are really, really good. But this is kind of as a learning thing. So, you know, hopefully not much we do, but we're learning as we're going along. So getting back to that. So once things were determined that, you know, the reason to have other people come, and it was determined that it's not, does the de-escalation training, so the humans, me, if I pull out here and 4 cars follow me and turn on the lights, as a human,
Freaked out.
I'm freaked out,
Right.
you know? And so that's, I think, what I heard a little bit what Lisa was saying, in that, not criticizing, but in the de-escalation training, and was there or is there talk about, hey, we have too many cars here, there's too many visual. And I remember on one of my ride-alongs, we were there, but we weren't there, you know?
Yeah,
And so.
And that was kind of my question, is like, once arrived on the scene, is there a protocol or
There is.
policy?
Right, when you
that
push
for
on.
folks
Right, yeah.
going back?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there is, and officers will do that typically if they think that there is a kinetic call happening where there might be a large response. They'll get on the radio and say, no more units needed, everyone else can go in service. That is a standard common practice for us to do on a typical basis. Like, you know, let's say you have like the calls for like 10 people fighting outside of a restaurant or something like that. You are going to get a very large response. But sometimes, you know, as does happen, maybe people exaggerate the number of people, or the first officer that arrives on scene doesn't see 10 people fighting. They actually see 10 people standing around talking, maybe loudly with one another, and they're having some sort of verbal disagreement. And so they'll quickly get on the radio because they can hear the sirens in the background and people coming, you know, very quickly, and they'll say, no more units needed. Everyone can slow it down, put everyone else in service. Basically, like, we're good here, like, I need like one more person, and that's it. And that does happen on a normal basis,
In the CIT training, does that emphasize that? Because once you're dealing with somebody that's got issues, it seems like to me it magnifies.
Well, that's not even just for CIT purposes, is that we don't want to expend all those officers on one particular scene, for sure. And two, especially if they're in an emergency response scenario, we don't want everybody running code if you don't need to, because the possibility for a potential accident would occur. And on a call, and I'll use another scenario here, but just so that we're clear of how that actually works. If there is a person with a gun call or fight, what's actually probably coming across the air is 2 people being dispatched, but everybody else is going. Because we're using unnecessary airtime to say you, and you to go. I just want to make sure we're sending these 2 people, but I know everybody else is coming. So generally speaking, depending on what the details are of the call are, if you have 2 officers that are around the corner, blocks away or whatever, they may actually clear their call, not mark out that they're going to this call, and slide by just to check on them to make sure everything's okay. So that it's kind of a fluid movement, and a lot of it is non-communication, but just checking to make sure everything's okay.
From a resource point, I get that, but right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm representing a citizen right now. And so I'm thinking about the citizen. And I know that because I'm military. Don't go waste all your stuff, because we could have something else. We got something real going on. Okay, so I'm all in on that. So I'm just trying to just understand. I think you've done a good job of letting us know that piece about, I understand why, and then, how do we withdraw, get this people that we don't know, he's got PTSD, whatever, but we know he's agitated. And so once things are at a place when those officers, they did a great job. Once they get to that place, how to de-escalate and get the visual. Like I told you, I explained the visual. 4 cars come by here, I'm scared. So it's
not just the cars. I mean, it's
the
and I'm
people
sorry
too. No, go ahead. We're on the same thing.
And again, I don't want to criticize. I know how difficult it is for police officers. I mean, I was telling Julie I was driving along a couple of weeks ago where someone was pulled over in a car because they had a warrant out on them, and the guy would not get out of the car, which is frightening for everybody. And when the officers spoke to me later, when things had calmed down, they said he kept reaching back into the car, they didn't know what was back there. I understand the fear that police officers have to deal with every day, so I don't want to minimize that. I guess the thing that I wondered about was the decision to get that close to someone who was so agitated so quickly. It felt like they got out of the car, they walked over right away, they were like a foot away or 2 feet, instead of assessing the situation. This person seems agitated. And although I might think that the agitation doesn't seem like mental illness, how do I know? They're just agitated and I don't know what's going on. So that would be my one concern about it, was it didn't feel as though the officer took time to assess and try to bring the person down a little bit before they got that close. And had they not been that close, they would not have been as afraid, because of course, the guy did not have a jacket. He couldn't possibly have had a gun. He might have had a knife, which only is a real threat if you're a foot away. So it's just sort of the decision to get that close and not assess the situation before they got that close.
Yeah, so I think we were, we kind of talked about it with that officer, and you have to remember. So let's go back to the scene of where this took place. It is a storefront, and so if we have an agitated individual and there are people inside the store or possibly exiting the store, coming in and out of the store, that presents a problem, right? So I have to maneuver myself in a position where not only am I assuring that I'm going to be safe, but that there may be people inside that may inadvertently walk upon a very chaotic scene and with some animals involved. So I don't, without putting myself in that specific situation, because I was not there. It's a little bit different when you're on the ground, kind of seeing everything laid out. There are reasons why that takes place. However, I think what we have to look at is that occurred 100%, and were the actions that took place after that objectively reasonable for that officer to do. And so I get what you're saying. Like, I understand, but then, I can be like, well, it was a storefront and there are people inside, so maybe, again. So I'm just
gonna say one thing, just one.
Yeah.
Just one thing. I mean, the officer didn't even try to approach him in a way that can we talk? Could we move over here? Because there's a storefront and customers are going to get nervous. I mean, verbalizing his concern, rather than not verbalizing his concern and the person getting even more agitated. And again, I understand how difficult the policeman's job is. I'm not trying to minimize that. I just feel like there were steps that could have been taken that could have lowered the temperature if he had just verbalized and asked, can I talk to you? Is it okay if we move over here? Where this incident might never have happened. That's all I'm saying. Okay.
And it may not be related 100% to this case, but the cell phone thing, what part of the training when you're going through the training that helps an officer, or do you have something in there where you can distinguish between what is a cell phone and what is perceived as a weapon? Because that's the part that had me stuck. I was like, you can clearly tell the shape of a cell phone. So how is that?
I want to point to two things related to that point. One, which is just to say, we do want to be sure that we're reviewing kind of the facts and the incidents.
Okay.
Strictly just pertaining to this incident, which your question, I think, is valid. Like, what kind of, I'm recognizing that there is a rise in kind of public interest in external transparency in police interactions, that it is much more likely now than it used to be that somebody would want to use their phone to record. And I think that's addressed partly in the IPA report. I want to note one error I have in my discussion plan. I have the IPA recommendation reversed. It's not sustained for search and seizure and exonerated for use of force. I have those backwards. But the policy stipulation in this case was to do with whether or not the phone was taken to prevent the incident being reported. And the note in both reports was to suggest that the interaction around the phone took place very quickly, that it's kind of impossible to determine whether that was whether that was the intention of the confiscation, that, you know, it was a very short time between, you know, the comment about I'll tell you what, and don't reach into your pocket, and then the grabbing of the phone, and then the returning of the phone. So I just wanted to give further context for the question as it pertains to this case, and then.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, that wasn't the
I think your
original
question
thing,
is
though.
valid.
What I
I
was
think
saying
that
was,
Chief Chamberlain has a response.
So I think one thing to be mindful of from perspective wise is when at that particular time, it appears to just be an object. And the question I think that you're asking is, how long does it take before you realize that object is not a weapon? Is that an accurate assessment?
yeah, because we've had incidents throughout the states where officers thought it was a gun and it was actually a cell phone and the person ended up dead. So I'm just wondering what part of the training or object recognition, what's the word?
Recognition.
Yes, that police officers, what part of the training is that to be in their initial training, or is it ongoing, knowing that, you know, things change over time? Like, it's hard, maybe because I'm a civilian, it's hard for me to just look at me like, are you kidding me? This is a phone and you can clearly tell that. And most people put their phones in the back pocket.
Let me.
But it's just, that was just observation,
Go ahead,
that's it.
Go ahead, no, go ahead, please, go ahead, and then
No, go ahead, Jim, I want to hear it.
Yeah, let's go back to our training almost a year ago, right? So let's go back for this past year and let's go back to the scenarios. One of the scenarios that you and I walked in, there were two people inside of a room. One of them had a weapon on them. We didn't know that, but they were sitting down in a chair. We walked into the room and we were about 3 to 6 feet away, and that person had a knife on them. The distance between us, we didn't know that. We didn't know that they had a knife. They had a knife in their back pocket. She stood up, presented a knife to us. She closed that distance between you and I within it was faster than a second. So that distance was closed, nor could we make a decision reasonably of what she actually pulled out. Was it a knife or could it have been a cell phone? So we walked in, we were presented the scenario, and we think about what happened. That's almost analogous to where this argument is going, of how could you based off the totality of circumstances, how can you reasonably decide on whether or not that's a phone or a weapon within a matter, depending on the distance, right? So if we go back to that training and you think about how fast that happened, was it reasonable to understand that it could have been a phone or a knife? I don't, I mean, again, it's objective. And I think what happens is as an officer or as you go through training and experience, and I'll turn it back over, you start to understand how to react better, how to have better conversations, and how to recognize and lower that temperature more quickly on whether or not it's a weapon, a cell phone.
And I would just like to also add to what Jim said, sorry. In regards to cell phones, they may not always be what they appear as well. There are many cell phones that have been transformed into being concealed guns themselves. So everything to us at that point is an object until you're able to confirm what it actually is in the same type of scenario that Jim just described.
Well, that's good feedback, because I did not know that part, but thank you.
You can Google it, like cell phone gun. Yeah, and officers do get
And it looks just
lighter.
like that.
I mean, they make guns out of all sorts of common looking objects, but cell phone gun is very popular.
But I think it's pretty common nowadays that everybody pulls out a camera and starts recording. That is a standard thing right now. And I think the perception, I think that's why it's really good that second officer could get that phone back, because the perception of the community could be ACPD didn't want us recording. That's an unintended thing, but so that I think we already beat this to death. That second officer really did a great job giving that guy's phone back. And so as long as the training recognizes that, might be a weapon, but how fast do we give the citizen his rights? That's the debate.
To kind of dovetail with what you're saying and bring back something that you were saying, Julie, about kind of what's in front of us. One thing that I really wanted to elevate, because I thought it was done very well, is in the IPA report, just talking about the accuracy, in that section 2, and how we're dealing with things that can be characterized and seen. And were they simultaneous, or did one happen first and one happen later? And to the extent that we may characterize, and just take a firm position, that may not necessarily be the totality of how something can be viewed. And I just really like how that was pulled out, because the difference in this situation of saying an object was pulled, and then a statement was made and an object was pulled, and as an object was being pulled and a statement was being made simultaneously, those have big different repercussions. And I really appreciate how IPA pulled that out. And I think that, it reinforces again why we're here, why this was set up, because, oftentimes it's those little differences in language that that can lead to an opinion or determination, which could go, either way. So I just really I really appreciated that part of the reports. I don't have any questions on that, but it seemed the right thing to bring up. And the last question that I have is really just from my understanding, teasing something out. The FTO override, it's something that we all said that we appreciated. That when the FTO said, let me take control of this situation. Could you just tease out for me more about how that determination is made, when that's done, where it's like, okay, you know what, training time, we're done with training time for right now. Now I have to be a little bit more demonstrative in our training.
Meaning from the FTO.
From the FTO, what kind of things trigger that?
Similar to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But if there's not a command presence, if there's a need to interject because the information is not being delivered in an effective manner, anything that is adverse to our policy and or to the law, I think that's gonna be the initial jump in. And then there are circumstances that are not just needing an immediate action in which they can work with them to get to where they need to be. If you go to a stolen car and your one question needs to be, what was the last time you saw your set of keys? That's a time where they can walk them through get to those questions. But when it's adverse to policy and to law, they should jump right in and correct that circumstance.
And then,
And also, just let me pay that, thank you, but also officer safety is an immediate like override. But then I also want to frame this in, remember, there's a learning process that is taking place. And an FTO has to let that leash out just a little bit. As long as we're not breaking law, as long as we're not breaking policy, as long as no one's gonna get hurt, we've got to make that person sort of figure stuff out on their own. So there is a latitude there that FTOs will give recruits to sort of figure it out. But then you'll see something like we saw here, which is like, clearly there was a decision that was made to override what was happening, and it was a good decision. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
it doesn't actually raises one that really will be the last one, which is because, we are in a unique situation with this one because we're dealing with, an FTO, and we're also dealing with someone who's new. Now, with someone who's new, of course, we'll say training. But what type of things are more than just, training, but they're still in that recruit period? Is there anything that would say, oh, hold on a minute, this may have been so much that there's something more than training that happens? And I'm not talking about disciplinary, but I'm like more time as a trainee or something like that, and not just training. Is the question
Right.
clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for field training, much like your ride-alongs, they're in the same vehicle with them as well. So that assessment may be done if this is more of, we need to go back to the books because you're not understanding Miranda or things like that. That's when they'll go back. They also do, like after you're out there on a period of time, the other trainees that may be training with you, the two field training officers will get together, build scenarios that we already have made, and send them through those scenarios because now they have a little bit more experience. So if it's a matter of getting a level of confidence into asking basic questions reference a robbery that just occurred, what are the things that you want to be mindful of when you get here, setting that stage? Because we responded to 2 robberies and you didn't do all the things I needed you to do. So we'll create that scenario just to make sure that you're hitting some of the key points that they believe that you're lacking. Everybody's going to be a little different. Remembering too that with that training environment, first thing, especially with the robbery, and I know I'm making something a little bit more intense, you got to get to the call first. So the whole geography piece is very important as well, which is one of the concerns that everyone has. Oh, I got to get there, but then I'm not considering what I'm hearing when I'm there. So all of that multitasking is all in accounting.
Okay, so we have more than just more training. We can also have a scenario recommendation, and would there be a possibility of more time as a training officer? Okay.
Or as a trainee.
As a trainee.
Yeah.
So like instead of 2 years, maybe it's another 6 months.
We have say like, hey, you can extend out. We want to extend and see some more independence of your capabilities. That is something that we evaluate and do. And for field training itself, we do our own scoring and evaluate it, and we'll send someone. But it's not an endless training cycle because if you're not getting it,
you're not getting it. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah. So I had one last kind of stipulation that I wanted to address. I think this one is much more subjective and goes to Lisa's point about, when we're talking about use of force, I think the training was to do with, distance and time, creating more distance, buying more time. And from the interaction, to me, what sticks out is kind of a lack of the communication where if you're responding to a call where the call was that there was an encounter and an agitated person, that the personal contacts policy, which is a section of the rules and regulations directive manual, dealing with promoting a culture of communication and engagement with the public that from the get-go kind of fosters the trust. Our mission here as the COB is to maintain and increase trust between ACPD and the community. And so I think a lot of us are going through a period where we're figuring out how much more important our language is in different interactions. But I heard from in the training, an officer describe his kind of personal goal in personal context with folks. So I recognize that a population of a police department has different personalities and needs and experience with different kinds of calls. But can you guys speak a little bit to the kind of cultural efforts within ACPD to promote where it's a subjective policy, and I don't think that there was a policy violation here, but maybe an opportunity, as Lisa mentioned, to kind of use more communication in initial engagements to foster a more positive engagement that maybe starts out with de-escalation.
So are you talking about for this specific scenario or just overall, like overarching?
Broadly within ACPD, that like building cultural and communication competence doesn't usually happen by rules. You don't give people a script and you can't, whatever. So can you just speak to how that dynamic exists or is evolving through ACPD's?
So for the longest time, we had, what did we refer to it, which we hated, which is soft skills training. And it was basically conflict resolution training. And so we started to embed that into our training repertoire. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I think is when we started. And that sort of married up with our, there's no other better way to say, like our hard skills training, right? So like we need to teach officers how to handcuff people and how to defend themselves and how to shoot weapons and things like that. But then I think there was a sort of this aha moment that came along where it's like, we are teaching people very like motor, muscular motor coordination skills, but there's another side about conflict resolution that we need to ensure that our police officers are getting adequate and ample time on a repetitive cycle, which is what we've done with all of our competency training skills, like firearms, like tactical, like, defensive tactics and driving. So these are now on a repetitive schedule. And I think we've taken that initiative to make sure that there are two sides to a police officer. There's the physical side where we need them to accomplish physical skills. And then there's the conflict resolution side, which is an important piece of being an effective police officer is how do we ensure that officers are equipped to handle conflict resolution. I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about.
It does, thank you.
But also on the communication piece, one of the things that we have encouraged, and I'll use it from this perspective, is to drive in new driving schools. When you send your teacher to drive your kid to driving school, one of the things that they're encouraging them to do is commentary driving. Where you are driving down the road, I'm going to flip my blinker on because I'm turning right, so I need to push up on it, then I turn right. So that commentary driving, commentary communication, because we do so many things all the time that's very with an assumption that everybody knows what you're doing, that being able to do commentary things, that is a very hard skill. Because imagine, as you're doing what you do every day of brushing your teeth, like you think you wouldn't have to say that. So it's just about thinking about the steps, thinking about the things that you're asking someone to do, and that's a way to make sure and ensure that they're able to replicate those actions.
And that goes directly to the gulf between the community and the police. Like the police are trained, they know what they're doing, they know that they don't intend, in most cases, virtually all cases, to do something, but the citizen doesn't know that. And there's anxiety when, again, just to go back to the point about too many police or whatever, there's anxiety because, unless you have everyday contact with the police, you don't know for sure what's going to happen. It's interesting, and this is totally an irrelevant comment, but I was looking at the case, Mummy, and you might get an interest out of this. It was actually the summary that you put together, and it cited Delaware v. Prowse, which is like an ancient case from law school. And I thought, well, I'll look at that. And they actually talk in there about, from like 1979, about anxiety in the civilian population when a police car comes up and stops somebody. Back in 1979, they were talking about it, and it's interesting. So it's a real thing. And I think the reason there's anxiety is because citizens don't know. exactly what's going to happen unless they know the officer or they know, and so in a way, it is incumbent on the police to commentate at what they're doing in a sense that say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move over here, whatever, to explain what they're doing as they're doing it, which it's not easy.
That answers my question. Thank you. Are there other, I guess we should need to wait for Anika to come back so we can vote. And then we'll take a quick break before going over open investigations.
I just wanted to make a quick comment kind of to round up a lot of the comments, but I think what you just mentioned, Dave, was a good segue, which is that, taking into context that we are in a position to look at these circumstances after the fact, right? We are literally Wednesday night quarterbacking, right? So it's important to think about, what was in the mindset of people in the situation that they were in at that time, both the officer and the community member. And that's I think like the pivotal kind of analysis when you're thinking about whether an action was within policy or not. Many of these actions, most actions, can be justified by some law or policy because laws and policies, generally speaking, give officers a lot of latitude. Some of that can be, perceived as like a lack of accountability, which, there are some valid arguments to that. There's also, a need and necessity for there to be latitude because situations can vary from one situation to the other, which is why there aren't always going to be a lot of hard, fastened rules or training that's going to cover every single scenario. But what is so important about what we're doing here is looking at this situation from the perspective of a community member and also, an officer after the fact and thinking about like, what can we learn from this interaction? While all of these actions, and this is why we reached the findings that we did, could be deemed within policy, what I'm hearing in this discussion, and I think what any community member might say is like, this still doesn't quite feel like the interaction we wanted them to have. Like this was not the ideal customer service experience or what have you. And that's where I think there's the kind of like power in the work that we're doing here, which is just trying to figure out where there is some room for conversation between, everybody, all the stakeholders involved here, the department, our oversight agency, the community, the county at large, and how we can foster these conversations. There's a lot of tactical reasons why, or resource reasons why you may have a certain number of cars respond to a call. But that's the reason why I raised that in this conversation. And sometimes like in a complaint, the complainant may not exactly articulate like, I felt like I was being over policed or I felt X, Y, and Z, but just the mention of it, or you can see how they responded to it, verbally or physically in the call. That's where I think like pulling out those conversations to just say, and Albert and I have those conversations when we're going through these cases. It's just like, I understand why you would have had 4 cars pull up here. But as you said, Gary, thinking about how a community member might feel when 4 cars pull up, how do we strike a balance there that helps us to understand what community members are seeing and experiencing, or even somebody driving past in a car who doesn't understand what's going on in the situation. I've definitely heard people all the time, they're driving past, they're like, oh, look at all those police cars. Is there really a need for that? Well, you don't know what the circumstances are, what information was dispatched to those officers. But the more we have these dialogues and the more we as community members start to understand why there are certain tactical decisions or resource decisions that are made on behalf of the department, and the more the department starts to facilitate dialogue with us as community members, or continues to, I shouldn't say starts to, because I'm sure it's not the first time you have this conversation, but continues to have these conversations, I think therein we are utilizing these situations as an opportunity to hear each other's voices and humanize these experiences beyond just, is a complaint sustained or not sustained? That's, I think, what is really important to be like pulling out of these investigations.
Thank you for that. I think that is important contextualization because, as you said, hindsight is very different than being in a situation, and we want to take that opportunity. That's a big part of why we're here, is taking that opportunity to slow it down and from a community perspective review what does the engagement that we want look like, and how do we build culture and policy and practice and relationships between the public and the police to increase and maintain trust. I'm gonna hear a motion for a quick break, so that we can vote when Anika gets back. Do I hear?
I'll move for a break.
Okay, second?
Mhm.
Wonderful, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break and be back at 7:32. Hot five.
One of my ride lines, I saw how fast.
We're back in for a.
Julia.
They said it was waiting for me. I said, oh, no. Yeah. Don't make me look like the bad one.
Better you than me.
That's okay, I was considering that.
Going day, sir?
Is that all right?
Okay.
Mommy.
Okay.
How you doing? Are you Googling? Are you Googling?
I missed it.
Never mind.
Oh, what am I doing right now?
Yeah.
I'm pulling up the stuff that's being.
Ready?
Oh, okay.
I like it a lot.
Okay, team. So having gone through our kind of questions and interim policy and the specifics of this case, I think we want to reflect that the goal of our conversations here is partly to get to the heart of what would improve interactions and trust between the police and the community. In the recommendations from the IPA and ACPD, Office of Professional Responsibility, for policy 1 for search and seizure, the IPA recommended that or concluded that the allegation was not sustained, citing that the phone was taken, but we can't verify whether or not the phone was taken for the purpose of interrupting filming. And the OPR exonerated the finding based on the taking of the phone and the return immediately. So it's Gary's and my recommendation that we agree with the finding of not sustained for policy violation 1, search and seizure, that the interaction being quick and the body worn camera footage kind of capturing it from that angle, that we agree that the finding is not sustained. So I'll hear a motion to vote to agree with the recommendation of not sustained.
I make a motion to agree with it.
Second.
All in favor of voting to agree that the search and seizure policy violation is not sustained, aye?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Wonderful. For policy violation 2, use of force, both at the IPA and the ACPD OPR concluded that there was not an excessive use of force and that the policy violation was exonerated. I think Gary's and my recommendation is to agree that the use of force is not sustained by the evidence, is exonerated by a review of evidence. Any questions, comments, or a motion to agree?
Move to agree.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. So that concludes our investigation review. Mami, do we want to move to status of open investigations?
We need to open a few, just a couple comments, just a
Sure.
little after action.
Sure.
First, I want to make just an overall comment on process, having the opportunity to go through the first one, very well organized. The ability to review all of the documents very clearly in a case was extremely helpful, and it was going to hunt and find things. Because those Axiom evidence emails are never ending. And no, I feel and I understand it. So having it organized in one place was super helpful. And then to see the report first, and then more from the IPA standpoint, and then even go further into detail. And then the effort to have the opportunity to interview and talk with the complainant, very well documented. And it allowed us the time that we needed to carefully review, I think, and have a substantive conversation we did today. I mean, no doubt we could keep going. There's a lot to talk about here. But, very well preparation. So I think it sets a good standard for us for, to be able to have the totality of the information to come here and have a substantive conversation.
Thank you. With that, I want to acknowledge as our first investigation review and a volunteer citizen board that we are going to keep learning, right? We are certified to do this work, and we will become increasingly, competent in our qualifications through going through these proceedings. And I think that, in each of these individual investigation reviews, we're kind of limited to understanding the facts and policy violations of this specific case, but that over time, just for any members of the public, that it is within our purview to make policy recommendations. And what we're looking for as we review these incidents is, patterns or opportunities that we see for improvement for the ACPD to evolve in the interest of increasing and maintaining, public trust. So as a hybrid body, I'm eternally still very grateful for our access to not just a police auditor, but a very specifically qualified and talented police auditor and support staff. But we will get better and kind of more mature at this as we go. So we will take public comment on all of our meeting activities today at the end. We noted that we have it marked as open discussion on the agenda, but when we finish with status of open investigations and community engagement, we will happily receive public comment. So in the interim, we have two more agenda items. One is status of.
Julie, can I just ask a question? Just
Sure.
and under this guise that we're learning, please excuse me, but I have. This was quite brief to us probably months ago, so I'm sorry that I haven't kept up. But can we just quickly, I don't want the whole story, but just quickly, if we voted sustained today, can we just do a quick 2-minute process? If we had voted that on one of these today, just kind of walk us through the next steps. Would we receive something? This would be where the ACPD would then provide their, can we just go to that quickly?
I'm going to point us to our protocol. So let me pull that up because we updated this after the last meeting. So in our investigation protocol, we initially had kind of our process for assigning 2 leads, the opening briefing, the closing briefing, in the parallel investigation review, discussion plan for the public meeting, assigned investigation leads make recommended findings, we vote, and under our section for discipline, if applicable, if an allegation is sustained, the completed investigation will be forwarded to the officer's chain of command for disciplinary recommendation. The disciplinary recommendation will be reviewed and issued by the chief of police. The grievance process happens in parallel for officers who may wish to appeal or grieve a discipline in accordance with administrative regulation. After the grievance period has passed, the investigation is considered closed and is forwarded to the COB within 5 days. I think the piece that we may be missing, to your point, is that I'm not sure we captured here. No, it is. Okay. If we make a recommendation of discipline finding of a sustained allegation, the chief of police shall within 30 days state in writing their rationale for declining to implement the recommendation. The written response shall be made available to the COB, county board, county manager, and the public. However, discipline is determined by the chief of police and the group, or the grievance process is final. So concluding these proceedings, regardless of the findings, the next step is for us to put together our report on what our recommendations were and what our vote was, to kind of capture the nuance of what we took away from this conversation. So that's something that you and I will draft and circulate to the COB for review. I captured as much of the comments and discussion as I could so that we can synthesize the same way we did with the incident and the evidence, whether we find, other opportunities to just kind of comment on the subjective and post-processing perspective.
That would be from us direct to ACBD, would it go through Monique? We would probably let Monique look at it, but she's,
I think that report is public.
yeah, but our sustained decision goes to ACBD.
Yes. But remember, we wouldn't recommend that it goes, well, if we recommended, for example, that one of these were sustained and it wasn't by either the IPA or OPR.
Okay, here, sorry. Let's backtrack a little bit. Okay, so here's the investigation protocol. After you all conclude your discussion, and I know it's like, this is our first time doing it, so what translates from paper to practice it's gonna become muscle memory after y'all do a couple of these. But so based on what we did today, right? You had your discussion, and then you had the 2 investigation leads give their recommendation on what they think the sustained finding should be. As a body, you would vote to agree to adopt those recommendations or not. And if you don't, that's the scenario where you would go allegation by allegation and say, okay, are we voting to sustain, not sustain, whatever the allegation should be, right? So let's say it was something different than, let's say both of my report and OPR's report were both exonerated, and you all wanted to go a different direction. You wanted to make it not sustained or something. So whatever the other allegations are, you just go one by one, and then you would vote. So then you would all need to vote in favor of sustaining it. And if you voted in favor of sustaining it, what would happen? And remember, where we're at procedurally in terms of like the posture is the COB is reviewing a completed investigation. So it wouldn't trigger the investigation to start a new investigation. It would just be your opportunity to document in your public report, we thought it should have been sustained, and then it's important that you articulate the reasons why. You wouldn't be having a conversation at that point about discipline unless there was a sustained allegation. And then you would have a conversation about whether you agree or disagree with the discipline. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so that's phase 1 of the conversation. The second part of the conversation is around recommendations. So you'll hear throughout these conversations that people have things that they are drawing out of, well, shouldn't this have been done differently? Or couldn't this be done differently? Or can you explain why? So having had those discussions and having had the benefit of hearing from the police department why something was done one way or another, once you vote on the allegations themselves, then I think you would want to make sure you capture what the recommendations are. And those aren't ones, according to the protocol, and that's going to be on, I think,
6.
oh, right here, number 4. No, after 4. Yes, that's discipline.
So can we have recommendations even if we exonerate? That's where I'm not.
Absolutely. So 5C. Now, you don't need to vote on the recommendations according to the protocol. We're looking at 5C. COB may or must also craft or compile training and policy recommendations related to the complaint. I'm actually not sure why I said may or must, because you don't have to necessarily do it, but you may. Those you don't have to necessarily vote on, and that's your opportunity to get everyone's individual input on that, but the 2 investigation leads. So I would say, open the floor and say, having heard the discussion that we've had today, and we should do this with this complaint because that would be to finish it out, right? After you voted, having had the benefit of the discussion, are there any formal recommendations that any commission members want to have included in the report? And then the investigation leads capture those recommendations and you would put those in the report. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I have our comments captured, but I'll hear from the board if there are any formal recommendations that we want to include in the report.
I only make the distinction because some of the comments were like questions, I guess, and then after having a discussion about it, people may or may not still want to make a formal recommendation around anything in the report. So that's the only reason why I would say it would make sense to circle back at the end of the discussion, just to make sure that those are the recommendations of the individual commission member or the body as a whole, if you want to adopt those into your report.
that.
Or you could also just adopt the recommendations that have already been made in either the OPR report or the IPA report as well,
Okay.
unless there were additional things that you wanted to specifically opine on.
I mean, from my perspective, I think that the personal contact policy is intentionally subjective, and it's meant to, it's included in the rules and regulations because it's intended to foster a sense of positive community engagement. I think that it feels to me from this instance like there's an opportunity to strengthen what the stipulation is about opening conversations with members of the public at the onset of an incident, to your point about making explicit a consideration of taking an opportunity to not even de-escalate, but kind of approach a situation with minimal escalation such that there's a time for the kind of commentary communication that Deputy Chief Chamberlain described, where it almost just sets up the mindset of having a more intentional interaction where you're trying to create space and time, and that includes in conversation. So that's my recommendation. Is I think that there's room for that to be more explicit because of what we said about, I think this, we want to think about what kind of interaction we wanted this to have, and recognizing that it's an opportunity for after action and kind of hindsight reflection. That's the recommendation I propose.
Is it possible to learn what the training on the personal contacts policy is? Because it's hard to, without knowing what that is. I mean, my sense is that the training officer here, if he had been alone, the incident could have gone very differently and potentially very worse, in part because there wasn't a great deal of initial conversation, understanding that he may have felt he needed to create a command presence and that there was, some flux to the situation. But having said all that, we don't know, at least I don't know, if the training officer just maybe didn't, exercise the kind of personal contacts that might have smoothed the beginning of this encounter, or if there really isn't, the kind of training that would have addressed it at all. You know what I mean? And I think we need to think through, is this a situation that relates just to that? I mean, it doesn't, because this is closed and it doesn't impact that particular training officer. So what we're talking about is a recommendation to the entire police department. Is that right? I mean, we got to be careful about
Our
that.
recommendations in this report pertain to this case. Our recommendations in the annual report will be for our observations about the culture writ large.
So when we say this case, what do we mean? Do we mean,
This investigation.
but I mean,
But like
we can make a
in
recommendation
my-
that would impact the officers in this case? I mean, I don't see how.
We make a recommendation that's available to the public, including all of the officers and citizens who are involved in the incident. So it's
Sort of
not,
for what it's worth, kind of like.
I mean, that's kind of all that our report is at this point.
And to piggyback on that, it may be helpful to use the IPA's recommendation observations as a jump off, and
Are there specific recommendations from the IPA?
So within so turn to page 8, does investigation warrant like training recommendations, for example? So there's a training recommendation specifically for Officer 1, for example. So that's something there which, listening to the conversation, it seems as though that's something that this group may be inclined to want to echo. There's continuing down, there's conversation about different concerns or comments of things that we may just want to have a continuing conversation with ACPD about concerning, for example, that when the concern you raised about the perception of over policing, like at what point can we look at how do we, when can we say, maybe at this point we move on and there's enough officers there. It's not that I have to be told no more officers respond, that kind of stuff.
So let's just take these one at a time so we can capture them, because the goal is we want to make sure that we include everyone's input in the draft report. So training recommendation for Officer 1, my understanding from the evidence we reviewed is that, under the guidance of the field training officer, this officer had been told to be focusing on a command presence. To me, the purpose of an additional training recommendation is to be able to balance establishing a command presence without interrupting your ability to have a kind of courteous and cautious opening engagement with a member of the public where there is a report of agitation or just somebody having to interact with a police officer in the first place, which could be agitating in and of itself. For the second thing you were talking about to do with over-policing, is there a recommendation you want to make for this case based on the facts of the investigation?
Well, I like how this is worded, maybe someone can smith it, but encouraging further discussion between the police department and the community to explore ways to respond to calls for service in a manner that does not compromise officer safety, while also balancing community concerns pertaining to over-policing.
Got it.
So, it's very,
Yeah,
it's not soft, very soft, but very practical, that it's not that, again, understanding that you don't always know, what the situation is. It a puppy? Is it a bigger dog? All you heard was dog. You don't know, but then once you know, then how, what adjustments are made, but just having that conversation, right? And then the one other one I'm pulling out here is encouraging ACPD to consider creating or expanding existing training pertaining to officers' interactions with active or former members of the military who may suffer PTSD or similar trauma-related responses. So a lot of that can, go to seeing, and that can be tweaks, because we hear that there's already an to say this is part of existing training, but maybe it's, as they're looking at the trainings they, continue to do, how they can, tweak those. Those are the ones that I highlighted for myself that stood out to me. And there was, I don't think just commendations, but one reflection I personally liked was just, the noting the FTO's, response to how, and that it was a good use of their ability to do the override FTO.
Definitely support accommodation.
Yeah.
Can I ask just a clarifying question? I'm sorry if it's in all the stuff that we read and I already forgot it, but when you speak with the officer, when you spoke with the officer, or at any point, is there a conversation with that person to say, well, let's reflect, what could you have done?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, so
Okay,
that occurs all the time.
It's probably in there. I don't know.
So those conversations happen post-interview.
Okay.
They do. So, we always sort of debrief with the officer to now that we're done interviewing you, let's talk about the incident. Let's look at, and let's have some self-reflection about, maybe things that we could have done better, or maybe for next time, things to think about. Those conversations continue to occur in the Office of Professional Responsibility.
I think it's also important too that, even for seasoned officers, once you leave a call, a lot of times you'll see the officers gather or stay around at some point. They're discussing a lot of times what transpired on the call, what we could have done different, even in those aspects. So training is always ongoing and understanding different circumstances at the same time.
Are there other inputs from the group on recommendations for this investigation?
I have one last thing, and I have concerns around, and it may already be captured here, but sort of an understanding of personal space. I'm just wondering, that may be very specific, and I don't know how, at some point I'd be curious to learn more about the trainings that they have, because I think the issue of personal space and understanding that different people have a different feeling around personal space. But I don't know how you would put that in there. I guess
I think that's a recommendation for us internally that we may want to, in the course of, because we have ongoing training, to be able to revisit some of the specific trainings around the individual cases. So I'll take that as a separate note, because it doesn't sound like there's a specific recommendation.
No, not for this. I just think that it's
Good topic.
And also cultural differences in how people communicate it. I told you, like Hispanics never say anything without screaming. So, it's just sort of like, I mean, there's just cultural differences and in the way people respond and, I don't know, anyway. That's not helpful for this. That's the sort of an aside for sometime later.
If there are no additional recommendations, we will call this one closed and move on to open investigations.
Good.
And I should be clear that when I say Hispanics never say anything without screaming, I mean my family.
I don't know that that's just limited.
I don't want to label it entirely. My family never says anything without screaming.
As part of the African delegation, I feel you. Same. Okay, status of open investigations. Just wanted to highlight that we published a public newsletter. You all would have also received a progress report that kind of shows you everything that we did in Q3 is what we just wrapped up. How many of those investigations were assigned different tier levels, which is, like meant to reflect the level of complexity and how much time and resources go into them. And also which ones we actually exonerated or found to be non-investigative. So basically we didn't pursue them any further beyond the preliminary review. Those will all be reflected in that. Separately, you would have also received a quarterly report that details exactly which cases fell under each of those categories, and then a kind of brief summary as to what were the factors that we considered that led us to one decision or one category or another. It's also important to note that even in cases where we make a finding that it is exonerated by DEMS, for example, which means that we have reviewed all of the digital evidence, body-worn camera footage, those sort of things, and we find the actions to be within policy, it doesn't necessarily mean that there might not be a recommendation that comes out of it. So when you're looking at those reports, sometimes you'll note that I still made some sort of informal recommendation, and sometimes that could be, as Captain Kim was alluding to earlier, those just kind of informal debriefings, whether it's department-wide or officer-specific or something like that, where there is, some room for improvement, even if something is within policy. So I encourage you to review those, and of course, at any point, if you all have any questions or concerns about anything that were categorized as exonerated or non-investigated, which those decisions are always made jointly, meaning that we were both the IPA and the OPR jointly decided to make those, to categorize those as they were categorized. If you ever have any questions, is how I wanted to round that out. Feel free to reach out to me and Captain Kim, and we'll be happy to discuss those with you all. And of course, if you all disagree with any of those categorizations, you are always welcome to make your own recommendations or to get more information about those and, decide your course of action with those particular complaints. We have, I think, a couple more investigations that are now kind of complete from the investigation standpoint. So a couple complaints that are complete from the investigation standpoint. So definitely be checking your emails for scheduling some debriefs coming up. We will have to probably do a couple reassignments, and we'll probably get to that in the open discussion, I think. Okay. But just definitely be looking out for that. We want to make sure to get through those debriefs as quickly as possible so that we can then schedule out the remaining investigations that you all want to do for this year. And maybe that might be part of open discussion as well. And then which ones we're going to schedule for the following, when we come back from break in January. I think that's it as far as open investigations, unless anybody has any specific questions or comments or anything like that.
I only want to reflect that you're doing an excellent job capturing the data around how much time goes into these investigations, because as we get new complaints and the number of complaints, changes over time, we may have additional support needs in different fronts. And so in our December meeting, I think we'll have a couple of specific things to consider in talking about We have requested a blanket extension for the initial cases that came in because lacking the right equipment, we weren't able to get to them in a timely manner. So just giving some specific consideration to what that starts to look like before our annual report goes out. But otherwise, just to say thank you. I think your report did a really good job kind of summarizing and making clear, and then it's, as she said, easy for us to look at for the ones that were exonerated by evidence, is that what it's called?
Dense, yeah.
Yeah, exonerated by DEMS, that we still have access and can look at that in case we disagree. So if there are, we'll take more comments or move on to community engagement, which I'll say is also very lovely featured in your quarterly report. Thank you for capturing that. Yeah, the process of building our community engagement muscle is still ongoing. I'll see if Gary has updates he wants to share on some of our current outreach and planning activities.
Thank you. So first of all, what I'll share up front is I think that outreach is all of our business. I've just elected to be the lead sled dog to get us out, moving out. Okay, and I have got contact info. I'm starting with all of the community associations. I didn't know we had that many. There's like 50 in the Arlington area. And I've already got connection with 48 of them. There's probably one close to a neighborhood each of you live in. But I'm going to start next Tuesday. Arlington Heights Civic Association has invited me. They had a fallout. There was somebody who was supposed to come and brief, and they had fallout. They said, "Do you want to take the slot?" I said, "Sure." So here's what's going to happen here. So I've sent the president this great flyer that Ian built. It's kind of the one pager, you know, who we are, what our purpose is. And so he's going to distribute this to and this, I think this process is what we'll do for all of these, is we'll send them a read ahead, you know, basic one page, easy, to the association. And the purpose of that, so they can come prepared. What I have talked to Dave about this, very short presentation on our part. I really want to get the interaction from the people. Are there any Q&A? What have they heard? Most of that, but make sure, our goal is to make sure they know who we are, what our purpose is, and what we do, okay? Also, I think we'll advertising, you know, got some slots maybe that might be open, but encouraged, you know, kind of what we're doing. It's got our picture on it, the upper left corner. But so what I'm going to do is kind of Ian's going to help me develop. I already have kind of a draft of some talking points. What I don't want to do is give everybody a script, okay? But we're going to have some talking points and the real purpose so you can tell it in your story and how you like to talk, or, you know. So we'll at least have some themes, so we're all kind of, you know, we're all in the same space here. So we do the first one next Tuesday, and that's me. And then we'll get some feedback. David and I are going to talk about this, and then we'll refine the talking points. And then I have teed up, ready to go to all, I think it's 48 of these other organizations, ready to send this out. And so that when we get that back, we'll have to stair step this as far as, you know, who, what, but I would like to build a calendar and a plan and give people a chance. You know your associate where you live better than me, so I'm a stranger. So my plan is that we each sign up somewhere and get started on this moving out. The secondary piece that we're going to move out in is at the Clarendon Days. I got out there a little late, but Jim and I and Ian were sitting there. We ran into the lady who, she works with the Rotary, but our ears lit up. She says, I also work with the Arlington Homeless. It's a homeless organization, right? And so we felt like this was kind of a high priority piece to get connected with her. So Ian, I think you've reached out to her again. So we're going to try to map that into our calendar here. And what I'm imagining in is probably after the holidays is when we're going to turn this up. I'm not going to mess with, you know, Thanksgiving picnic after hearing about that Trader Joe's technique. Get smoked turkey. So think emails went out. We'll try to get on the calendar and start feeding into these associations starting after the new year. I'll do the trial run and you and I will do some feedback. And then we'll try to update the template that we send to everybody.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I want to report today.
Wonderful. I love the one pager. I feel a little bit like maybe with the civic associations, because that's kind of our systematic way of trying to get to geographical coverage. We may not want to give a briefing, that we may want to keep it conversational just to encourage people to have comment. But I don't mean for that to be prescriptive. It was just something
No, the briefing, I'm taking 10 minutes or less. I don't like to put people to sleep. So talking points, pick and choose. Like you said, feel out the, feel it out. But this is not a, the COG was started, this isn't 30 minutes. This is 5-10 minutes. And the read ahead is really driving that. So
Cool.
I think the Q&A engagement is really that's what I want to encourage. So.
Other questions, comments before we move to open discussion and public comment? Mommy?
Yes. First of all, I love this conversation. I think this is one of the areas where we have like the most opportunity to really develop our work out and develop the meaning behind what we were talking about earlier, like why these complaints matter, why these investigations matter. I really liked what you mentioned, Gary, about like sending a read ahead. And as you were talking, I was just kind of writing down. I know we started putting together a community engagement or like a communications plan, you and Julie and Dave did. I think it might also be good to distill that into maybe just internal, like one-page document that just has some steps to make sure that we follow as each of us kind of identify different things that we want to do. So establishing a contact person. I think it'd also be good for us to establish an address book so that we all can share contact information, obviously with people's consent, and we all have access to, if you're like, hey, I think I really want to reach out to so-and-so association or so-and-so person, you can go to that address book and find that person's email address, for example. And I have a lot of people's contact information, so I can get that started if that's something that you all think would be useful.
I'll merge mine with yours.
Perfect.
So we have one.
Yeah, it could be a shared document that we can all add stuff into. So establishing a contact person, add them to the address book, and then checking in with that contact person. So in addition to them learning about us through the read ahead, you're also establishing with that contact person what some of the priorities are from that community. So then you can be mindful of that when you go in to talk to those communities about what your talking points should be.
That's a good point, because I've already asked Arlington Heights, we're interested to hear, what kind of things we can represent or help you out. What are your issues?
Yeah, I think it'll help facilitate a more effective, meaningful discussion. And then I think it's also a good idea for someone to physically just go check out the space. If, we can be mindful of any sort of accommodations that we might want to provide, or seating, or materials that we can bring, if there's like a setup or that sort of thing, having eyes on what the kind of parameters are. And I'd be happy to put all this stuff like in writing, and, we can add to it or, tweak it. And then just, checking with me and Ian specifically to see what kind of materials or resources you all might need, so we can make sure that you're supported. Obviously, it's our intention to be there and do these things with you all. But for example, like with the one coming up next week, Ian and I are going to be at NACOL. So if there are instances where you all are going to be on your own, which you're 1,000% capable of doing, so I trust that that'll be just fine. But I just want to make sure that ahead of time you guys have any sort of things that you all want to hand out, or if you need literally like tech equipment or things like that. We have setups, cards, all sorts of different things in the office that we can make sure that you all have access to before you go out to the events. So that's one comment that I wanted to make, is just kind of capturing all of these different things that we're doing as we are going out there, and maybe throughout the next couple of weeks as we're wrapping up the year, we can formalize some of these kind of procedures just to make sure we're all approaching it in the same way. And then my second comment was something that I'm particularly interested in developing out is our conversations with the youth in the community. So I think, going to civic association is a good place. I don't know that we're gonna reach a lot of younger folks in those settings. So I wanna make sure that we are specifically going to places where we can talk to people, whether it's schools or, literally the basketball court or wherever it might be. So I definitely would love to work directly with anyone on the board who is particularly interested in doing that type of work. I think we should also, I think we should also tour juvenile detention facility as well in the scope of that work. But I just wanted to make sure that we call that out separately and think about like areas where we can specifically go to for that. So I'll reach out to you and talk about that more.
Good.
Yep, I'll jump in on that.
I know we have a resident expert with the kids here, so
100%, I will absolutely.
you are gonna get voluntold either way.
Yes, I'm in.
That's it from you.
Thank you.
Other comments on community engagement? Okay, we'll move to open discussion and then take public comment. I want to make 2 remarks in open discussion. One is that due to a move, Martine has resigned from the board. So we'll be initiating the procedure to fill that slot as soon as possible. We still have a quorum requirement of 5 of 7, I believe. So that will partly be what drives me haranguing everyone to know in advance if we can be physically present or not, specifically for December, since we'll do another investigation review. That meeting, just for everyone's advance reminder, is.
Because we saved the possibility of doing virtual to the end of the year, right? Like we could do 2 virtual, but can we do virtual if we have to vote? I can never.
We can do an all virtual meeting so that we can all vote.
Okay.
If it's all virtual, then we can vote given a virtual quorum.
Well, I'm just, it's because I
Yeah.
remember we saved our 2 for
Right.
the end of the year. because of
13th.
holidays.
Yes, the meeting will be for the 13th. I'll coordinate with y'all individually to figure out if we think it's a good idea to do that meeting virtually.
We're also meeting on the 29th, right? Or no?
Somebody could take that.
I thought of
No, of
November.
November. I think we might have a conflict
Oh.
doing that, but I'll coordinate with you all to make sure. But I just want to make sure for sure that we have our December 13th meeting on everyone's calendar, because we will definitely have work to do. I think that was all I had for open discussion. Maybe was there anything else we wanted to talk about?
That was actually going to be my question about if we're planning to do another meeting in November and or December, is there going to be 1 meeting or 2 meetings? Just so I know how to schedule out investigations for the rest of the year.
Okay. I can't remember who had a conflict on November 29th. That's you. So if the rest of us can all attend, we can hold the investigation review. And we could do that. We can only do 1 of those meetings virtually because we can't do 2 virtual in a row.
I'm out of town the 29th. Yeah, I just looked at it.
Okay.
We can discuss offline too, and then just let me know what the meeting schedule is. I just want to make sure that I debrief the respective parties well in advance so that they'll be prepared.
Okay. All right. I'll circulate availability so we can see if the 6th or the 20th would be another opportunity to do
The 6th and the 20th of
December. Are you out both those days?
the 6th, yes.
All right, we'll coordinate that offline. And Mummy, I'll prioritize getting that information to you by the end of this week.
And then just in terms of, well, first I want to thank Martine for his service. If you're out there listening, thank you. And we're sad to see you go. But also I wanted to just amplify what you said about taking in applications. We did have some applications that came in because since we put it up on the website, we've been accepting applications on an open basis. So Julie and Gary and I can look at those applications and see if there are any people that we think might be good candidates to call in for an interview. We are still always accepting applications though as well. So just wanted to make sure that you all, if there's anybody that you think might be a good fit for the COB, that you are disseminating the link out, and I'd be happy to make sure you guys get an email with the links in there, so it'll be just ready to shoot out to and forward to whoever you'd like to. And we still have the vacancy for the non-voting member as well, so encouraging people to apply for both openings would be great as well. And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you.
My only recommendation on this net we're throwing out, I'd like us to throw that as wide as we can to get a good cross-section. As I look at our, racially we do, but I don't know on the other type of demographics where we sit as far as representation, so.
Well, we need another person.
We need
who's
another
under
young
30.
person.
Like younger, yeah, age might be
Yeah, I
something.
mean, it's too, having Martine was great in general, but, having somebody who's 20 or whatever he was, was particularly.
I'm just gonna caveat that as a joke. Okay, but 20-something.
Right.
Is 20.
20-something, I like
He was in his 20s.
I recognize what you're getting at, because as somebody in my 30s, I would love to be called 30. But I think when you're 20, it might go the opposite direction.
Anyway,
we could,
Okay.
we could use some.
I don't know how we would manage that, but.
Yep.
Okay, completing all our other scheduled agenda business, I'll open the floor for public comment. Just reviewing the public comment guidelines, we're setting aside 10 minutes for public comment, and mindful of our need to provision for non-personally identifiable information. I welcome input from members of the community. Not identifying individuals involved.
Ma'am?
Yeah, please.
Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Board, police. But anyway, my name's Donald Hines, 65 years old. Ex-military. Robert was the DC police for 26 years. I was the military police. And I'm saying all of that to say this. I have nothing against the police. Only when they don't obey by the law, they expect me to obey by it. Then I have a problem. Okay? I'm very strong on my constitutional rights and my civil rights. And I guarantee you, I did a survey. I walked around to 10 police officers and asked them to tell me 4 constitutional civil rights. They couldn't do it. But yet, when they come out the academy, they swear to uphold and protect my constitutional and civil rights. The problem that I have is that how can you protect something if a citizen walk up to you and you can't quote that law to him? So how can you enforce that law? I got a big problem. I fought for those rights. And if I don't use those rights, I lose those rights. And I use my rights. I got 12 grandchildren. I got 2 great-grandkids. And the reason I'm sitting in this chair right now is for them. I'm going through the hard times right now, dealing with the police department, okay? So they won't have to sit in this chair. And that's why I'm here today. Now, I heard y'all say a lot of things about my case. I was there. The first thing that y'all forgot to mention is that conversation we was having, me and the officer, was consensual. I had the right to stop that conversation anytime I wanted. I wasn't under arrest. I wasn't being detained. I talked to him because I chose to talk to him. Once I got tired of talking to him, I had the right to walk away. He had no right to touch me. At that point, he had no right to put his hands on me. The other thing that's missing here, if I had a gun, do you think I would have willingly stayed there? Come on, be real. I waited for them to get there because I know I did nothing wrong. But for him to put his hands on me, it set off my disability. I was fine. I wasn't yelling or nothing till he touched me, where he did not have the right to do. And the reason that I filed the complaint, because these officers need to understand what our constitutional civil rights and their policy is. Now, the captain tells me that you know you was in the military, didn't you make mistakes? But this is what I need to tell you, sir. I am not your practice dummy. So if he don't know the laws and the Constitution, keep him in the academy. Or keep him in the car so his trainer, he can watch that person until his trainer feels that he's ready. And the other thing that I don't like is for a trainer telling a rookie you're not aggressive enough. Are you serious right now? See, y'all don't hear this stuff. Y'all don't understand what it does to a person that it happens to. My whole disability was set backwards because this man put his hands on me. Just because I wasn't shot, I wasn't cut, I don't see no scars, don't mean that I'm not scarred. I'm scarred in here. I had to go back and reschedule my therapy. I was moving forward. But because this rookie that they are making excuses for set me back. And if you're afraid of a citizen with a dog chained to a pole, with a phone in his back pocket, a person that waited for you to get there. If I had a gun, I'd have been gone. Or I would have took the gun and hid it and came back. I didn't move. And for that many police cars to show up for abusing a dog, so-called abusing the dog, come on, man. It was so many police cars in the parking lot that people couldn't even get out. It was going to the store just about. And then for this rookie, I have no sympathy for him. He was 2 cars away from me. His trainer was standing in front of me. So if he was afraid I had a gun, why didn't the trainer grab me? He had to come over from where he was at. Since y'all talking about distance, he was the furthest away from me. The trainer standing directly in my face, because that's who I was talking to. I never talked to him until after the fact. And then my PTSD kicked out. And you better believe I went the heck off. You know what I'm saying? But see, that's something else y'all need to understand. That wasn't even wrong, because I had freedom of speech. The police are held to a higher standard. It's their job for me to be able to call them the F word. And they do nothing. Because by the Constitution, they can't. I keep trying to tell these officers, you are not feelings police. You are law enforcement. Most of these officers get their feelings hurt. Most of these officers have bad attitudes. You know what I'm saying? Just like me, if I come up to them and they feel that I know more about my rights now, that make them mad. Because they don't know. They don't know. If you don't believe me, try it. Next officer you see, ask him what's the First Amendment. See, if it was up to me, and all of y'all look like y'all know what I'm about to talk about. When I was in school, before we sat in that chair, we had to pledge allegiance to the flag. I feel that every roll call, these officers need to recite some of the constitutional and civil rights because they don't know it. But yet, when they come out the academy, they raise their right hand and swear to uphold my rights, your rights, all of our rights. Well, how can you do that if you don't know it? How do it look when a citizen walk up to a police car and say, sir, what is the First Amendment of the Constitution? He catch an attitude because he don't know. And he don't want me to know that he don't know. So he deters to something else. Like I'm bothering him, I'm this. I walked up the street the other day. And it was an accident. Me and my dog snowball. So I see 4 police cars sitting on the sidewalk. If I put my car on the sidewalk, I'm going to jail. I'm getting a ticket. So why don't the police obey by the same laws that we do? Now here's the other thing I did. I'm getting ready to cut off. I walked by a police car. Their policy say, when they get out of their police car, they have to shut their laptops. Am I right? It's y'all duty to protect the citizens' information, right? Am I right? Oh, y'all don't even know. See what I'm saying? And they wear bugs. It is their policy to shut. See, I can walk up to a police car and I can film anything I can see with my eyes. You can't trespass my eyes. So if I walk up to a police car and the laptop is up, I can take my phone and stand right there and film. And that's what I did the other day.
Mr. Hines, unfortunately, that concludes our time for public comment, but we're very.
Was it 10? That's my 10 minutes?
It was 10 minutes.
Okay.
But we're
Thank
grateful,
you.
we're grateful for your time coming to
And
speak
you
with
will.
us.
I just want my case looked at like it is somebody who been shot in the head. I just want my case looked at like somebody been stabbed. That's all I want. And for him to put his hands on me, just because I broke conversation, consensual conversation, he should be punished for that. That's all I'm saying.
I
So
appreciate your time and participation this
I hope you
evening.
do. I hope you're not just saying that.
Absolutely not. For the meeting, generally, we welcome public comment because it is our job to understand the needs and the perspectives of community members so that we can broker effective investigation reviews and find opportunities to make recommendations to improve policy and the kind of informal relationship between the public and the police. So in that spirit, we welcome additional comment from other members of the public. The public comment guidelines are posted, and we appreciate if you can sign up in advance. But having addressed all of our agenda items, I will declare the meeting adjourned and thank the board.
Thank you. All right,
Thanks,
thank
Al.
you. Thank you, Kirsten.